What work moment made your attitude go from a proud employee to, I'm just here for the paycheck? The cameras in the prison where I worked could capture the first shower cabin in both the women's and men's communal showering rooms on each floor. These cabins were basically a long row of shower heads separated by tall, opaque plastic walls and a half door in front. If you walked in while an inmate was showering, you'd see their feet and maybe their head and shoulders if they were exceptionally tall. But whoever installed that one camera on each floor made it possible to get a top-down view into the very first cabin in that row. It took me years to figure that out. It never occurred to me to try to move the camera that far. One time I came back from the women's floor and caught a male employee watching one of the female inmates taking a shower. When he saw me coming, he pretended he just accidentally pushed the little control stick that moved that one camera. I didn't say anything to him at that time, which I now feel ashamed of, but I did bring it up with my supervisor. I was told to keep my mouth shut. I brought it up with another supervisor and was told the same thing. Then I thought, they can go to hell with this. If I lose my job, so be it. And I went straight to the prison director. They reviewed a month's worth of tape, matched it up to that employee's schedule, and fired him. I expected to be treated like a traitor by my colleagues afterward, but surprisingly, most of them were on my side. But yeah, after that my attitude changed from, I like this job, to just pay me and leave me alone. I watched the camera settings like a hawk and made a point of telling female inmates not to use the first cabin. To clarify, I am a woman, and I worked in a German prison. The first floor housed female inmates, and the second floor housed male inmates. Our prisons are set up differently than American prisons. For one, many German prisons nowadays employ private security personnel to handle small tasks like accompanying inmates to the doctor, hospital, lawyer meetings, meal distribution, and body or life counts. I was one of those personnel, the lowest rung on the ladder. My immediate superiors were that Americans would call corrections officers, and in that prison, they were a rather tight-knit bunch with a we're-better-than-you attitude. There was, and still is, a very real chance that going up against any of them meant losing your job. At that time, I really needed that job. For the record, I still do. Quitting there hasn't done me any favors financially, which is why I didn't say anything at first. I did go to the prison director within a week. I know that doesn't make anything better, but for me, it was a decision between doing what's right and facing unemployment. It's no excuse, I know. If there is one thing in my life I'm ashamed of, it's that I had to think about doing the right thing at all. Also, of course, it's not okay if it's a male inmate being watched. I honestly don't know if the camera issue is common knowledge. I asked, and some people said it was, while others said it wasn't. As a female guard, I wasn't allowed to have anything to do with the cameras on the second floor or the male inmates. In the 8 years I worked there, I was on the second floor maybe 10 times. 2 of my male colleagues told me they did what I did, warned the inmates. When I left in April this year, there were plans to remodel the camera system in the whole building. It's shocking to hear about the privacy violations in the prison, especially with the misuse of surveillance cameras. It's a clear breach of trust in inmates' rights. Story 2. When I was much younger and working in a factory, my boss found out I was going to college night classes. He called me into his office and demoted me from a technician position to a line worker. His reasoning was that since I was going to college, he thought I wouldn't be around much longer, so he promoted a line worker to replace me. I knew absolutely everything about their custom-made machine. Shortly after he demoted me, it started to give them problems and eventually stopped functioning completely. He came begging me to fix it, but I told him to pound sand. I wasn't going to do anything, and if he hadn't demoted me, the machine would have gotten the proper preventative maintenance. The current issue wouldn't be happening. I pushed a broom around the warehouse with the other 5 line workers for 10 hours a day, watching the guy he replaced me with slowly destroy this house-sized, multi-million-dollar machine over the course of about 3 months. That department of the company ended up closing permanently. Story 3. After a year of sleepless nights, taking work home with me, no weekends, and caffeine-related heart issues, my company held the end-of-the-year thank you award ceremony. We were all excited because the corporate had rolled out new, incredibly expensive packages that we were forced to sell the hell out of. Selling them was hard and oftentimes sleazy and immoral, but my location got it done. We were all expecting Christmas bonuses. Nope. The general manager, or GM, called her 2 managers to the front and had us congratulate them on the trip to Acapulco. The corporation was awarding the 3 of them in recognition of their leadership. Yay. One by one, the rest of us were called up to shake hands with management and presented with a generic mug with "Make a Difference" and the more you know shooting star printed on the side. No money, no bonus, just a cheap mug bought in bulk. I looked around the room and saw the realization in everyone's faces. All the stress they had endured and all the unethical stuff they had done was for nothing more than a mug. I saw souls pass a little that day. After that, I did my job and no more lifting one more finger than I absolutely had to. Story 4. I work in retail and posted here about a different issue, but I go through this all the time. I work in a small clothing store. With 2 people working, it's both easy to manage and not hard to keep clean, even with customers. There just isn't that much to do. I was recently spoken to by my district manager regarding my lack of performance. She said I did too much standing around even when there weren't things to do or customers to help. She suggested I clean the baseboards and toilets if I felt I really had nothing to do. She also said I didn't take my employment seriously. I replied that I made minimum wage, and due to that, the company clearly didn't take my employment seriously. If they pay a minimum, then the quality of my work would be minimal. I added that I had no issue cleaning up, including bathrooms, if she was willing to give me a livable wage. Until then, it would be minimal work for minimal pay. Shocked, she left me off with a warning. But really, employers like this should just go out of business. Story 5. A few months ago, I had a come-to-Jesus moment with my boss. I always prided myself in being able to get my job done in the most efficient manner possible. The fact that I could run my department flawlessly and still put in banker's hours was something I thought was an example of doing my job well. Well, it wasn't. My efficiency was my downfall. The come-to-Jesus meeting was over the fact that I wasn't putting in 40 hours. Turns out that management's measure of doing a good job was how many hours you put in, rather than how much work you got done. So now I make it a point to show up a few minutes early, wave to the security cameras, and leave a few minutes late, waving on my way out. The Japanese business model. Don't promote or reward actual work that gets done, just whoever looks like they're doing the most work. Story 6. I worked retail at a store that was open until midnight, so we would usually be done and going home around 1 a.m. This was while I was in college, so during finals week, I would plan with management to make sure my shifts ended by 10 p.m. so I could study before going to sleep, and still be rested for the exams. I had approval for all this, and when the schedules came out, I was the only person who worked every closing shift for the entire week. Management told me it wasn't their problem and I had to find people to cover the shifts. I told them that it had been approved, so by company policy, it wasn't my issue. Well, management held their stance and told me it was my problem, so the first night came along, and I worked until 10 p.m., walked up to the manager and said, "You need to find someone to finish the rest of my shift. Oh, and someone to cover the rest of tomorrow's shift. In fact, find someone to cover every shift of mine." And I walked out of the store. I finished my exams and then for the summer went to California to spend time with my father and enjoy some freedom. I came back after the summer to a job lined up working with dogs instead and was super happy with it, really. Last I heard, the store I walked out of had all the management fired. Story 7. Working in a kitchen for a guy named Rob who has absolutely no restaurant experience whatsoever was a challenge. The store I was at before closed down while I was on Christmas vacation overseas, and I was moving that summer anyway, so I took the job knowing it was easy money and I'd be gone in 6 months. But man, Rob. No, I don't need 3 giant tubs of pizza sauce for a Friday night. I have a ton of veggies that I will definitely run out of because you didn't prep them this morning. But yes, I'll leave the line and make another tub of sauce because you signed my paychecks. Oh, and during rush hour, you can just stand there and stare at the computer screen when you see me making peppers on the fly while my tickets are stacking up. Don't worry, bro, I got this. Dude even asked me how to make a few dishes when it was just him and me in the kitchen. Like, dude, you added this to the menu yourself. You should know this. Yeah, I'm still just a little salty about that one. Kind of a fresh wound. And when I try to bring in somebody with more than enough experience to replace me when I leave, the boss man fires him and hires a lazy head to fill my position instead. Like, Rob, I'm done trying to help. I did my best. Later. Story 8. I was working in the kitchen at a popular Italian restaurant chain on a super busy night. Something like 60 people were seated at once and the kitchen was getting backed up because the pass needed a manager to tray up the plates. Of course, the manager was in the office, busy doing manager stuff. He walked by at one point, and there was a pyramid of plates waiting to get sent out. I told him the kitchen was going to be super messed up if that food doesn't go soon. For those who don't know by now, the heat lamps in the pass will turn food to rubber after 5 minutes or so. The manager asked me why I cared so much about what's going to happen to the food, saying I'm not the one who paid for it, I just made it. I told him I do care. That's why I applied in the first place. He replied, "Maybe you shouldn't care so much about your job and just do it." I walked out and called the general manager or GM first thing the next morning, asking to use the open door policy that the handbook said was available. He also refused to come to work until the issue was sorted. I was told she was busy and she would call me when she had time. Of course, I never heard from her again. I feel that I should include that I volunteered for anything they asked. 5 a.m. truck, you get an hour to put it up and then come back for your normally scheduled shift every week. I honestly fell for their lies about Best Place to Work awards. Story 9. One of the assistant managers complained to me about asking her to change my availability hours. I was always the first person she called to handle someone's shift, and for 6 months, I did the job of a department head despite being a part-time employee. I was tired of hauling for my college classes to get to work on time, despite being given permission to come in 5 minutes late. I was written up for being late. Then later, when we got a new store manager, he couldn't figure out how to work the closing software. He wouldn't let me help him with a computer and made me stay till midnight. The man literally couldn't figure out how to reliably left-click. After I put in my 2 weeks notice, he pretended like I wasn't going to finish up that 2-week period and had an assistant manager look at me the entire time, which I actually didn't mind all that much because I had worked long enough and reliably enough that I was fairly good friends with the closing assistant managers. Story 10. Oh boy, lots of things. Everyone else gets to go on vacation, but I'm losing my PTO because they won't let me use it. I've been passed up for a promotion. When I asked why, I was told I was young and I got emotional, which is a complete lie because they promoted someone my age the year before. One of the old night supervisors had an actual panic in the deli and had to go home. The other one had severe anxiety and routinely retched in the bathroom when she got nervous. I'm too emotional because I ratted on my AGM when she broke the law and shouted at an ex-employee for picking food up off the ground and trying to give it to a customer. I've been there for 2 years, and they always have me working when BR or FSRA come in because I check every code and deep clean everything. But I'm being paid $2 to $3 less than my coworkers with the same position. One girl only started 2 months ago and makes a whole $2.75 more than I do. I've never been late. I've never called out, but the thing that was the tipping point was when they asked me to train a girl to pass me up for the night supervisor because I've run shifts before and already know this stuff. Story 11. I had been working at this bar for about 7 or 8 months when this happened. I hadn't eaten all day and wasn't feeling well, and I couldn't eat anything before my shift. I told the day manager and supervisor that I was feeling very sick and couldn't eat, and therefore couldn't work. Their response was that the Sunday prior, someone no-showed and it was a hassle, so I had to work regardless. FYI, I worked that Sunday, and the only bad thing about it was that I couldn't have the early finish I'd been promised the night before. I assumed I'd get sent home when I started retching just an hour into my shift. I had been in the kitchen just 30 minutes before and we were still serving food. Nope, they needed the staff on a Sunday night. Over the next few hours, they tried to keep hydrated. I also had a UTI at the time, while my supervisor tried to ply me with medication, which I didn't want to take, so I could make it through my shift. She gave me an anti-sickness tablet fizzing like crazy in some water and made me down it. I got annoyed when I retched in the bin 5 seconds later, despite the fact that A, you can't down a large amount of liquid when you're sick, and B, I don't like fizzy drinks, so even if I hadn't started retching at that point, I'd have the same reaction. After 3 hours, she told me I was going to the toilet too much and banned me from drinking water. I was running to the toilet to retch because I'd been banned from doing it in the bin behind the bar, and knew that if I did it in one of the sinks, I'd be forced to clean it up, which would make me even more ill. I was losing lots of fluids because of it, and I had been told by my doctor to stay hydrated anyway because of my UTI. She gave me a bottle of tonic water to drink instead because it has like 0.5% quinine in it. Again, I don't like fizzy drinks, and tonic water tastes like carbonated water. I retched after every sip I took. 6 hours into my shift, this supervisor decided that she was going to have the early finish. I'd spent the majority of the shift clinging onto the bar so I didn't fall over. I kept falling asleep, even if only for a second, every time I retched and while standing at the bar. My supervisor knew this. She'd been working with me the entire time, and I even told her I was so out of it I was falling asleep standing up. I ended up doing a 9-hour shift where I was sick for 5 of those hours. When I complained about it to the night manager, who started 2 hours after I started my shift, he said that he hadn't noticed I was ill. So neither the day manager nor the supervisor had informed him when he arrived that one of his staff was ill. And how could he not notice when there were only 4 of us working that quiet Sunday night? Safe to say I left there about a month or so later. That has to be a violation of something, right? Story 12. I had to miss 2 days of work for my great-grandmother's funeral. My boss seemed cool and understanding of the situation. I told her what was going on Thursday night. Things weren't looking good, so I should have let her know ahead of time. And on Friday, when my great-grandmother did pass, it was finalized that I was going to be out the following Monday and Tuesday for the funeral, which happened to be the week of Thanksgiving. Wednesday rolls around and I'm back at work. By noon, everyone except me and the receptionist has left work to catch flights or celebrate Thanksgiving early. All of my work is done by this point, so I text my boss, who had logged off for the day. She was working from home, to ask if it's okay if I leave a little early too, since my boyfriend and I were trying to drive to North Carolina that day. She tells me that I need to stay until 3 p.m. because I missed Monday and Tuesday and that it wasn't a holiday, so it's a privilege that anyone gets to leave early at all. Now, normally this would be understandable, except there was no more work to be done for the day. Even stuff I was working ahead on was done. She didn't let me know that I needed to stay that long until I asked to leave, which seemed really unfair considering everyone else had already left. I didn't miss work that week because I was sick or because I was on vacation, but because I was at a funeral. That was the beginning of the end. A few months later, I found out my parents were taking me to Hawaii for Christmas, so I told my boss I would need to use 8 of my 14 vacation days. This was in April when I told her, a good 7 months before the trip. She called me disrespectful several times for going behind her back to schedule the trip and flights without talking to her first. She even asked if I was definitely going, implying she wanted me to cancel the trip because she wasn't cool with it. I quit not long after that. Best decision I ever made. Story 13. It's less of a work moment and more of a college work moment, but relevant regardless. Basically, I'm in a team for my senior project. It is sponsored, so there's a company that keeps us accountable for our time and requires regular reports and whatnot. There's not too much of a big deal. I basically think of it as an unpaid internship without the extra hours because we're developing a commercial product, to be refined later by our employer. Another way to think of it is unpaid labor masked as college work. Unpleasant either way, but it is tolerable for the degree. The project itself requires us to make a voice assistant app. There are many tools to learn, and I'm generally excited to learn new things in my major, so I just go along and try my best. Next thing I know, the affiliated company wants us to skip our winter break, which is a full month. Not only that, they want us to meticulously record our time and expect us to work 15 plus hours per week, even on regular school weeks. Keep in mind, we're college students, so some of us have part-time jobs and all of us have class time, homework time, etc. What's the point in even trying my best for absolutely no benefit at all and getting exploited extra hard? Welcome to American college. Hard work begets hard work, not success. Success is for people who know how to play the system. Story 14. Being a team lead for 5 years while also training dozens of people on the new product that the company launched, writing documentation for it to help people learn, reviewing people's work, etc., all while the managers didn't know the product, didn't do any actual work aside from asking me for updates. I wanted a promotion. Aside from those 4 years, I had 5 previous years with them grinding day in and day out, 50 to 60-hour weeks to try to make this product successful. I'm offered a 3% promotion, and that was the best they could do. My wife encouraged me to look elsewhere. I did, and I was made a ridiculous offer I couldn't believe. The other company now magically offers to match, literally equated to a 35% raise. Nope, that bridge is burned. You lost the one person that cared about that product. They finally just had to sell it off not 3 years later because no one could manage it and was a sinking ship. In my current company, I've already been promoted. Another ridiculous raise and I couldn't be happier. Grass is indeed greener, my friends. Anyways, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 15. I stopped giving a care when my direct supervisor tasked me and my coworker with things that only a supervisor could do, such as looking into prospective employees, calling other companies in the area to become potential contractors. I was being paid $9 an hour to schedule maintenance for people, and I added my own monthly reports. My coworker and I essentially had the same job, except I had a larger client list. My coworker's area had a team specifically for her area of the state. We lost 2 guys in 3 months to my team's maintenance crew, so our service revenue fell from my section. Said supervisor was supposed to hire and train new people and never did. He never owned up to any of this to the owner, of course. So guess who was fired the day I was leaving for the weekend and 2 work days for my own wedding? This girl. That company messed up my mentality about work for a while, which was bad because the job market in this miserable town is so bad. Jobs are so limited, and I'm either overqualified or underqualified for pretty much anything available. Story 16. I had a huge work ethic at my old job in a micro lab. Despite forced redundancies, buyout led to cutbacks, I and a bunch of others worked hard. I think my record for overtime was 120 hours extra 1 month, including working mornings, lates, and weekends, because we were so far behind. Anyway, I started college, got my hours reduced to 22 hours a week, including 2 evenings and Saturday and Sunday. We were equally as busy and needed just as much help, but I was at college Monday to Friday, quite often for 8 to 10 hours a day. So when it came to my shift end and there were still 3+ hours work left to do, I just went home each night. I had to compromise. It was a huge ask for a huge payoff. I'm in a comfortable job with a lot of benefits and loads of spare time. So that 1 year of college really was a sacrifice worth doing. Story 17. I make decent money, but I'm underpaid relative to others in my department, who I consistently outscore at reviews. I appeal to everybody from my line manager to the site director. Constantly told, "Yes, we agree, but there's nothing we can do. They are older than you and there's no money to give you a raise." Eventually, I went off sick with depression for 3 months. Came back and was advised, apply for other positions and work hard and you'll go far. I worked harder than ever this year, put in lots of hours, completed more projects than anyone else, volunteered for extra work, traveled Europe-wide, went without seeing my partner or family for long periods, applied for jobs, got offered a position in management for a trial period. Fast forward 3 months. Still waiting for the management role to start, nobody can tell me when it will be. Had this year's review and received my worst score ever. Why? Well, my manager said my work has been excellent, but he can't score me higher because when I was really depressed, I was late a few times. Story 18. Unfortunately, my first job was being a cashier for a popular farm supply chain. I loved it. I loved the customers, most of which were farmers and lovable old people. Sometimes I get to recommend products or different techniques for various products. But I mostly just casually greeted and chatted with regulars. I loved my coworkers. My store manager was a little weird, but soon enough she was bringing me breakfast on days we opened together and genuinely caring about how I was getting on. Then my store manager left. She became a franchisee and opened her own location about 50 miles away. I should have just relocated with her when she offered, but I already had a 30-minute commute one way for a little over minimum wage. The new store manager started messing with corporate policies and asking us to do weird stuff that I was not okay with. Cashiers no longer counted their own drawers at any time. I never knew how much money I was actually responsible for. I was just waiting for the day that they accused me of being short. He couldn't make a schedule to save his life and refused to let our assistant manager do it, even though he had been there for the year and a half that I'd worked there. Now I'm driving all this way to work for 4 hours at a time as the only employee other than the new manager doing important manager stuff. That or I'm getting 5 a.m. calls on my day off because he forgot that he needed a cashier to run the store. The customer base didn't respond well to this as they had to wait an extraordinarily long time for any assistance. Every day I just robotically echoed, "I'm sorry. I can't leave the register to remove your chain. I'll page that out a 5th time. Maybe they didn't hear me in the office." And I was constantly running out of money to make change. I waited for over 20 minutes for ones. Running out was my fault. This guy, we'll call Lenny, was a team lead. Read CEO or God in his mind, became the ultimate stick-up and, for whatever reason, decided to begin pestering me. I would like to think that he saw me as a threat because of my stellar performance, but we'll never know. It took a long time for me to get so stressed out about it that I went to the manager about it. Guess what happened? Nothing. My final straw was one morning when I opened with a store manager, assistant manager, and Lenny. Why so many people, you ask? The general manager was dropping in. Remember how I didn't count the drawer or even put it in the till? Lenny opens the store. There is no drawer, no money at the register at all. They all forgot about it. I started looking for a new job right away. A team lead position opened up and I was expecting them to offer it to me as I had seniority. Not that I would have taken it, but they never even offered. I'm unemployed to this day, but I wish that I'd quit a lot sooner. I'm scared at how quick it went from being a job I loved to loathe. I quit 6 months ago and no one, 10 people, that I worked with is there now, other than the new store manager. Not even Lenny. He got fired because the cashiers that I proceeded with went straight to corporate with their very own complaints. HR even called to ask about mine. He apparently had like 5 complaints, and the new store manager hadn't fired him yet. Story 19. I work at a restaurant as the bartender. In restaurants, it's not uncommon for servers to have a few drinks before going in. However, they're typically high-functioning. There was this 55 to 60-year-old woman hired who smelled like a bottle of drinks when she came in and submitted her application. We all laughed at the manager because we couldn't believe she had the audacity to do that. We didn't laugh, though, when she came in for orientation a week later. Really, management? This woman is still here after 2 months. She's been caught drinking during shifts in the bathroom, in the bushes, and she's not sent home. She can't even speak legibly. She gets about 3 to 4 complaints per shift about her demeanor. Management just doesn't give care. The social media page is just complaints about intoxicated servers, and the amount of people that come in to eat here has exponentially dropped. It's all because of her. I'm out after the holidays. Story 20. Last year when I started my new job, very early on, I was asked if I was interested in part-time management. I said yes, but nothing ever came of it. What was odd was that every few weeks I would be asked if I was still interested. I would reply yes and inquire about what needed to be done to achieve the position. At the time, we were going through management issues. We didn't have a permanent store manager, only 2 part-time assistants, so we borrowed several managers to fill in from other stores in our district. Every manager that came through the door asked me if I was interested within a 3-month period, but no information was ever given to me about the process or training. I figured that whoever was in charge, I didn't know who that really was because of the number of different managers who had been in and out. was waiting until after the holiday. In December, we got a semi-permanent manager who again asked if I was interested. I said yes and explained that I had been asked dozens of times with no responses from the company. It was then I was informed I had to apply and interview for the position. Don't worry though, she was going to put in a good word for me with the person who would interview me. We did a mock interview and she told me I was ready and would do great. They finally set up a phone interview with the assistant district manager and myself. When I called, she had apparently double booked herself and had to call me back. When I finally heard from her, we chatted a bit and went on with the interview. She asked several questions that I had trouble understanding their relevance, nor were they the by-the-book questions I was asked during the mock interview. At the end, she said she didn't think I was suited for the position. In fact, she said that when she spoke to the current manager whom I had the mock interview with, she claimed they didn't know I was interested in the position. It was only at this point I became suspicious. I agreed that perhaps I wasn't suited for the company since communication seemed to be an issue and keeping managers was unheard of. Within a month, we got another manager who again offered me a position. I explained the situation to her and she said, "Okay, we will get you trained and in 2 months, you will be ready for it." She never said another word to me about it. Training never started and it never pushed again. I've been asked by subsequent managers if I'm interested. Now I just say no. However, my performance just tapered out. I go to work only for the paycheck and couldn't care less if the store makes it or not. It's only been in the last 2 months that the company has managed to find a qualified manager whom I think will last, but it hasn't done anything to improve my morale or quality of work. Story 21. I spent 2 years working doing most of the hardware design and all the firmware coding, plus 90% of all testing on a new device for the company's then upcoming line of home automation products. The product manager was inept, barely doing their job properly and creating tons of unnecessary additional work for me. But I enjoyed what I did. I love electronics and love being an engineer, even if at the time it was draining me. I was hungry and wanted to prove myself in my first post-grad position. But when the president and vice president had a little argument with each other, the president took it out on him by not supporting and eventually shuttering the vice president's pet project, which happened to be the primary thing my division worked on. As a result, my entire division got suddenly informed we'd be laid off. No severance, just 2 months' notice. Minimum required by law for a mass layoff and an implicit "who cares" from the upper management because they expected us to keep working as normal even though the project was canceled. Yeah, right. We all spent the final weeks browsing job search sites and taking phone interviews. Story 22. The manager left along with a former employee. I got promoted to fill in the void left by the employee leaving, and they promoted the accountant to the managerial position. The thing is, they also let him keep his accounting position, so now he has 2 jobs in the same company. I'm starting my career and I didn't know the products that I now work for. I told him from the get-go that it needs some kind of support, but nothing was done on his part. The new manager is only out there for himself and doesn't help any of my coworkers, except one because her product line is critical. Aside from that, the general manager got promoted to CEO. He's the son of the company's owner. Go figure. He's a walking stereotype. Useless, no charisma, doesn't understand how this company works, and dislikes me. I've been working in this company for 2 years without problems, but in the past 2 months, I had a formal warning because the CEO saw me on Reddit. I know it's wrong, but it doesn't stop me from doing my job correctly. A disciplinary meeting because I answered a text, for medical reasons, in front of the CEO while waiting for my manager to start a meeting. During the disciplinary meeting, all that was said was that my attitude was problematic. But aside from that, my work is okay. I had no support from my manager, who just rolled me in the mud to protect himself at all. So now I really don't care anymore. And yet my manager is surprised that I'm not motivated. Story 23. Former job at a company no longer doing business. I was green and had a lot of catching up to do, but I was becoming highly competent and a knowledge expert within a year. And a group of people who had been doing the job since I was a child. But being so new, I was paid a lot less, almost embarrassingly low. My boss got approval to give me a 10% raise come the new year. Had my yearly review, which went very well, and he let me know about it. I was happy. Then when the time raises took effect, I had 2%. I didn't even notice yet when my boss called me urgently asking me to pull up my statement. I looked, was confused, and he was angry and hung up. Turns out a director did not look at any of the employees' paperwork. He had an Excel sheet he had to send to HR with the raises. He just copy-pasted 2% across the board and patted himself on the back and left early for the day. I eventually got a merit increase months later because my boss was arguing for me, but the damage was done. I forgot to point out that when I spoke with my boss later, when he said he was arguing for a merit increase, the director admitted fault to my boss when he confronted him about it, but did not go to the board and look bad by admitting he messed up. His suggestion was that I could get it the next year. Story 24. I'm a sand engineer. My job is to test out new equipment and write the manual on how to use it in our hosting environment. The ops team then uses it once the new stuff is in production. The old team is well-trained, clever, well-managed, and generally knew the job better than I did. I was basically just there to provide a manual for regulatory reasons. Then they outsourced. Apparently, it was to pay for building a new data center, but the grapevine says it's not any cheaper. They kept the absolute bare minimum of knowledge by keeping the newest and lowest paid employees on. The offshore team came in with almost zero storage knowledge. They were likely harvested from our general help desk staff. That meant my job went from writing manuals for people that didn't need them to writing them for people that couldn't understand them. We tried training them, but it was obvious they weren't picking any of it up. We were just nodding until we shut up. They quickly got to the business of fudging their numbers so they'd look good on paper, but they caused several major outages and drew them out much longer than they should have. Now I spend my time coddling and hand-holding instead of integrating new tech. Looks like the new team's idea of storage knowledge is knowing where to store their lunchboxes. Story 25. As soon as I realized that all of the hard work I was doing, the extra hours, the above and beyond, was getting me literally nowhere. Everyone at my company was rated on a 1 to 5 scale. The ratings were done quarterly. I was given a 4 rating 2 times. In 7 years, 28 quarters. Every other quarter I was rated a 3. I confronted some people about this and was basically told, "Oh, you want to be going for a 3. You're doing a great job." I basically stopped doing everything that I was doing because I thought I could get ahead. Went from working like 50 to 60 hours a week to working about 25 to 30. I was salaried. I showed up, but pretty much did the bare minimum. I still was rated as a 3 every quarter. The crazy thing is that companies laid people off all the time. Their growth strategy was simply to acquire other companies instead of innovating for themselves. So there ended up being a ton of redundancy. Somehow I held on through all of that. Now I work for the government. Story 26. I had spent 2 years telling my manager I had more diplomas and experience than most of my team, yet I was below everyone in salary. During the yearly evaluation, he told me he got everything I asked for. Fast forward 1 month later, he got me the results and proudly announced I got a raise of €1 a day, after taxes. The next day I changed my schedule and started doing 10:30 a.m. or 5 p.m. with a 2-hour lunch break instead of the usual 8:30 a.m. or 7:30 p.m. Things were much better. So much better that he tried for 4 months to have me take on a new mission that was a focus on the bad part of the previous one, failed to have anyone else do it, and then forced me on this job because, the customer already signed for this mission statement. I gave him a resignation letter and spent the rest of my 3 months' notice doing telecommuting to train for my first triathlon while moving out of my flat. After 2 years of brushing me the good way, the guy had the nerve to say during my farewell party that we had ups and downs, mostly downs, that every time an employee leaves his team, it makes him feel like one of his children is going away. Story 27. I worked for a company of about 35 people for 9 years. I was the 5th longest tenured employee, and the owner forgot I existed. To make a long story short, the owner would throw these really nice Christmas parties at really trendy places where he would pay for everything and hand out bonuses during a super awkward presentation. The presentation would take place after a couple of hours of drinking, at which point he would gather the entire company and begin calling up specific departments and talk about what they had accomplished during the past year. So he goes through the entire company and forgets 3 of us. We're all single-person departments, and he's had quite a bit to drink. He's about to finish up and the VP leans in and lets him know he still has 3 bonus checks. So he calls the other 2 up, talks about them, and then once again, begins to finish his hammered speech. Cue the VP again. He looks up at me, calls my name, says my job description, hands me my check, and that's it. Most of the other employees look at me like they want to crawl under a table for me. He had more to say about the warehouse guys who had only been employed for like 6 months. The owner and I were never friends, but I never thought there was any animosity there. My bonus was half of what it was the previous couple of years. Meanwhile, everyone else's had gone up. I later learned the owner thought I made too much money for my position and didn't have the bravery to talk about it. I began looking for a new job in the new year and had one by March. When I told him I was quitting, he had a completely dumbfounded look on his face and only said, "Okay." No questions, no comments, just, "Okay." Story 28. Generally, like I'd imagine most people on there, it was more of a collection of things building up over time. But I can point to a couple of big things. First, we get a yearly rating out of 5, which affects our pay increase and our bonus. Apart from once when I complained, I've had a 3 every year. They don't know how to rate my work, so they give me a passing mark. Whether I spent the whole year working really hard, doing extra work, whatever, it's a 3. Or if I spent the majority of the last year on Reddit putting most work off, it's still a 3. Second, we got a new manager, which is fair enough. A while after he'd been there, he had meetings at the head office with a guy who'd been there for like 3 months. He decided that this guy needed to be in our office, so he was brought up as my boss. I had worked here for over 10 years, and a guy who's been here 3 or 4 months was suddenly my boss. I think when I found out, I said, I don't care anymore, I'm going home. And one of the managers had me in a meeting room for like an hour talking about it. They said this guy would probably not stick around for more than a year. They didn't. And I was shifted into another team under another guy who's been there for a good 5 or 6 years. He didn't know anything about what I do at all. Not a clue. Currently, I'm on my 4th line manager who hasn't worked here as long as me, all without me being able to apply to be that manager. Story 29. I got hired for a job, worked there for 2 years, got given 2 small raises, but the boss pushed back against giving me any more. Because this was a job in a college town and had high turnover, near the end I was one of the more knowledgeable employees, other than the boss, and provided a lot of assistance to the newer guys when they didn't know how to do stuff. I also had one of the better relationships with the boss because he was very demanding and critical, and I was able to take it in stride where lots of other people would get defensive and argue back pointlessly. Eventually, I got a peek at the payroll. Because of the boss's management style, the company had gotten a poor reputation and he had trouble getting new workers to replace the ones who left. So he bumped up the starting pay significantly to entice more applicants. Meaning, because of his resistance to giving me a higher raise, despite me being the longest serving employee and doing arguably the most work, I was the lowest paid person there. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.